Hello, everyone, and welcome back down here to the Gamer's Den with me, your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. And yes, whatever mad heresy is going on right now, you are finding me more in the middle of the week rather than the weekend. I do plan on getting out my weekend videos, but this is something I've been wanting to get to for over a month now, and despite the fact that Grandfather Nurgle is awakened, postulating all sorts of horrible plagues upon us, we are still going to be going on, partly because of that, and, sitting at home a lot, but also it's spring break, and so schoolwork is not as much of a concern for me. Today, we are going back to the D20 Modern book, and specifically, we are taking a look at one of its supplements. And in my opinion, this is one of the better supplements that they had put out there. It's actually probably my favorite setting to run for D20 Modern, and that's Urban Arcana. Yes, this is a supplementary book. It takes the Shadow Chasers campaign setting recommended in the core rule book as one of the, I believe it's three possible settings that they have listed in there. And if you're not quite sure what Urban Arcana is, whether if you haven't played it before, if you've only briefly seen it, think something like the Supernatural TV series or Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island or the Dresden Files series. Basically, where it's set in the modern world, but magic is real. And to one degree or another, depending on how your storyteller wants to set it up, people are unaware of magic. Whether it's willful ignorance, people actively keeping their eyes closed to it, or different shadowy forces trying to keep the rest of the world unaware as to what's going on. I usually run it as some combination of all three, but magic is real, monsters are real, the different creatures from your various D&D, Pathfinder, Warhammer settings are all real and bleeding into our reality. That membrane between dimensions, between planes of existence is weakening, and it should go back to normal eventually, but for now, everybody's got to deal with this, and most people are unaware of it. Some creatures are just trying to get by and live their day-to-day lives. Others are trying to find a way back home, and some want to run rampant and take advantage of the fact that most of their prey are not going to be aware that they even exist to begin with. Because that's not an ogre walking down the street. That's some big, ugly-ass dude that's coming down the road. That wasn't a fireball. That was just some dude who threw a match and lit a gas leak or had gas poured all over everything. That's what caused that fiery explosion to rip through the alleyway. Literally any other explanation to try to fill in and make sense of what they saw, rather than just accepting the reality of what had just happened, that magic is real. Literally anything other than that is what people will grasp for in this type of a setting. But what does this add to for us overall? Specifically, it adds a lot of color and personality to the base D20 Modern game. It opens up different races, lots of fantasy races. You're no longer limited to that baseline human. You have elves, goblins, dwarves, half-orcs. It even has rules in place for you to play an ogre, an orc, a tiefling, a shadow-blooded human, snake-blooded human. So many different options. I believe even half-dragons are listed in there. They also bring in more advanced classes and some prestige classes, and there's lots of factions for DMs and players to utilize. They also add in more monsters and various NPCs, and they bring in some more spells and magical equipment, and lots of interesting things to be had all the way around with this one. For me, the factions in particular are very interesting because they stand as a stark example to me of a lot of creativity going into this game. But Wizards of the Coast also just didn't quite lean enough into it, I think. That's largely one of the big flaws with the D20 Urban Arcana, actually, just the D20 Modern books in general. They and I think they did it for a specific reason. Same thing with D20 Modern. They wanted to leave it open enough that people could go in and tinker with it, tweak things, play around with things a little bit, and adjust the game to fit what they had in mind. Because the baseline game itself was built around the idea of like, oh, the action movie thing, who wants to play John McClane from Die Hard, and go up against Hans Gruber and all of his men as they assault Nakatomi Plaza and they try to rob it and they're holding off the cops and the FBI. They really had this action movie mindset in mind for the base level gameplay, but they still left it open ended, and that's fundamentally one of the greatest strengths and its greatest weakness, the metaphorical double edged sword. Yes, you can do a lot with it, but it's so ill defined that it's like it puts a lot upon the players to try to come up with what their character's about, and certainly that can be a lot of fun, but at the same time, with the abilities that you get with it, it's like, okay, you want me to customize this character, but you're not giving me a lot to work with. I mean, you can write all the backstory you want, but for, any game, it comes down to the mechanics at some point, and the mechanics definitely need a lot of work, and it's Urban Arcana is no stranger to this either. But for the factions, they have things like the Black Feathers, which essentially an elf from Toro came over through that membrane between dimensions and was so horrified at the desolation of nature in our world that she has a psychotic break, retreats into a national park, finds a commune of hippies, and basically just turns them into guerrilla fighters that start attacking logging companies and oil pipelines in order to try to shut them down, or at least try to hold back the tide of industrialization as it starts ripping its way through the last bits of nature. You also have the Corsone Syndicate, which is a basically your classic mob family, but it's run by an illithid calling himself Louis Corsone, and his muscle and two personal bodyguards are two minotaurs called the Kozer brothers. I mean, minotaurs with assault rifles. It's just so much fun. And you have an illithid who can just absolutely blast and melt people's minds with his inherent psionic abilities. And he's got a 45 in his pocket too. It's absolutely great. You have Draco Industries, which is your standard mega corporation that is run by an Ifrit who uses a lot of draconic imagery and a series of special stylized crystal that it's modeled after dragon eggs that he uses to spy on different executives across his company. Then you have the Knights of the Silver Dragon, an order of holy knights, and the Mindwreckers, the Displaced, and Department 7, which is ubiquitous across all the different kind of settings and scenarios they have set up. In this case, they are generally not philanthropic, but sort of lawful good, lawful neutral-ish, trying to keep the peace, hold back the tide of these different shadow kind and different arcane effects. They want to keep society's eyes closed to the reality around them, but they also want to live within some degree of harmony with these different creatures because, well, they're coming over, but there's no clear way of how to send them back or find a way back for them. So they try to keep everybody settled in at relative peace and try to stem the tide of the more nasty creatures. Then you also have the Prancing Pony, which, in addition to being a nod to J.R.R. Tolkien's work with the Lord of the Rings, is basically fantasy McDonald's. They have little wind-up toys, just all kinds of awesome delights. It's great. I love it. And you also have Markova Industries as well. There's a lot of factions here, and some of them are really cool, but again, I don't know that they really leaned into this quite enough. Again, I believe they did it to allow people to be creative and insert their own factions, but I still think they could have just gone that extra step and did a little bit more to help put more color into this. And at least in my case, I of course have done so with a setting that I'm currently running for some friends of mine, definitely Shadow Chasers using Urban Arcana, but I added in two factions of, wait for it, biker wizards. I love the I love the image that's conjured up in my own mind. I mean, let's think some apprentice or heavily trained and armored and armed bodyguard on this big, meaty, powerful chopper, and attached to it is this sidecar with this frail, elderly looking wizard who's got his staff and wand and potions, and he's casting spells from it as his bodyguard pulls a sawed off shotgun and is firing into people going that they're going by with, lowering lances and spears, pulling out sabers, while the wizard is casting all these spells. I absolutely love the imagery. And not only that, but we throw in those large, massive vans that you have those epic murals painted on the side of. Only these murals actually have arcane and magical effects, and there's observation domes on the top that can be opened for the wizard to stand up out of and cast spells from there too. Absolutely so much fun. And in this case, the two factions are called the Warriors of Set and the Riders of Weejoss. Weejoss being the third edition goddess of magic and death and knowledge. And of course, Set being an Egyptian god of evil. And the two naturally butt heads, and it's created some interesting storylines in the game so far. But like I said, this book definitely adds a lot more color, and it doesn't just stop here with the factions. They have some more for us. I mentioned before that they added in races, and I kind of went over it a little bit, but here is the complete list in the D20 Urban Arcana book. We have dwarves, elves, gnomes, goblins, half-elves, half-orcs, halflings, orcs, shadowkind human, Aasimars, bugbear, dragon-blooded humans, drow, gnolls, half-dragons, half-ogres, ogres, and tieflings. There's more races in other books as well, but we're going to just limit ourselves a little bit here. And most of these races have challenge rating adjustments. What that means is that in comparison to the baseline human, these different races have enough abilities and bonuses that they're treated as effectively higher level. For example, a level 1 half dragon would count as a level 4 character. So even though he's only got one class level, it's going to take him the same amount of experience as a regular human going up to 5th level in order for him to level up, or him or her. So, I mean, there's that in there to kind of factor into and calculate along. Some of these races are so overpowered, like half dragons, that it kind of works, but others it doesn't work quite so well. Like Drow gets some abilities that are interesting and useful, but not enough to warrant the +2 challenge rating adjustment, I don't think. +1, sure. For the most part, I generally kind of do away with the challenge rating adjustment system, except for where I do believe it's warranted, like the half dragon. And in fact, because I just don't want to have to do the extra work and track it, I just disallow these races in particular. Dragon-blooded human, I allow that. Drow, I'll allow that. Tiefling, Aasimar, halflings, shadowkind, orcs, these things I do allow in addition to a lot of the base races. But beyond that, it's just getting into a little bit too much too fast. And I certainly recommend you do the same, just because I never like tracking that. And if everybody else is starting off at level 1, but somebody wants to be a half dragon, it just throws the power balancing way out of whack. You can work around it, but again, there's enough work for a DM to do. You don't need to be adding more to it, or letting your players add to it for that matter. And while it's well and good that we have these different races and some options that I definitely recommend you disallow, they're not the only things for your players to play around with, or yourself either, when you're making these different NPCs. You have a lot of advanced classes added into this here, and some of our first prestige classes as well. You have things like Arcane Ranger, Archaic Weapon Master, Glamorous, Mystic, Shadow Hunters, Shadow Jacks, Speed Demons, Street Warriors, Swashbucklers, Techno Mages, Thrashers, and Wild Lords. And not, again, like with the D20 modern advanced classes, these are not all created equal, and some of them do the same things as other classes, particularly ones from the D20 modern book, like Glamorist. It's it's the charismatic hero advanced class option, and it's not it's got some differences to its abilities, but it's not overwhelmingly distinct from personality, for example. And really, Glamorist is it's just very, very weak all the way around. And Arcane Ranger is another one. It actually is fairly distinct, but it feels more like an NPC class, calling in favors to arrange different item pickups, to get different items sent to you, or and possibly having to return favors later. It sounds good in theory, but it works as it is. It works better as an NPC class. It's think from the Constantine movie with Keanu Reeves, the his friend that's at the bowling alley that he picks up that interesting looking gun with all the dragon fire in it. That's an Arcane Ranger. It's like, oh well, I thought you couldn't get this anymore. Well, no, a night. That's an Arcane Ranger, but that's an NPC. Constantine's the player character doing all the fun and exciting things. The Arcana Ranger, I think, needs to be reworked a little bit. I could go into all of these classes and give you examples, but we'd be here much longer, and just some of these definitely need to be reworked. Shadowhunter is great. Shadowhunter is basically a ranger, specialized in hunting specific monsters. I always love going vampire hunter. But aside from that, these classes are definitely interesting, but they're not all created equally and definitely need work. And it's the same with the prestige classes as well. Archmage, great, advances your spell casting, adds in some interesting abilities, fantastic, mechanically effective, as well as definitely very, very setting appropriate. Artificer, on the other hand, makes you better at crafting magic items, which that's all it really does. No advances to your spell casting, none of that. I mean, in theory, you could be crafting more wands and scrolls and doing it more easily, but that's not really that big of a benefit, especially when you consider that even for a D20 modern setting using the Urban Arcana rules, you're going to be coming across enough resources to make up for whatever the costs are. You're going to you're going to be creating wands and scrolls. You're going to be finding wands and scrolls in this kind of a setting. So the Artificer is definitely another one, especially for a prestige class, that needs to be retooled a little bit. At least I certainly think so. Otherwise, it works great as an NPC class, but for a player character, I definitely recommend skipping it. And the Ecclesiarch is essentially the advanced class for a cleric, basically. If you're going the divine spellcaster route rather than doing the arcane spellcaster. And that's another thing I should mention here. There is, at least for Urban Arcana, none of these add in anything for divine spellcasters. The divine spellcaster advanced classes back in the D20 modern base handbook, along with the mage, which, it's great that they're there, but you would hope that you would have something new added in, possibly for one or both of those here, and you get that a little bit with Technomage, but that's not really all that huge. The base mage is just better than the Technomage overall. And a Holy Knight or Unholy Knight, they work fine. Your Paladin as a prestige class, basically. You get some buffs to your damage, you get some good abilities, you're great in combat. Mechanically, very, very sound class. Archmage, fairly sound class. The Artificer, not so much. And there's some things missing here. Again, they didn't lean enough into this, and they didn't add quite enough in here, and some things that they put in definitely needed to be reworked or have more options, more advanced class options. I think would have been fantastic. And that's not the only place where things ended up lacking a little bit.
Another spot where there was just a bit of a mixed bag comes to the spells. The spells, some of them are broken and incredible, like haste. Haste just adds so much to you. It's like, why not have it? I mean, +1 to attack, an extra attack, or an extra move, and +1 to your defense, and reflex saves, and initiative. Haste is an absolutely incredible spell. I've talked about this so many times. You better have haste over Fireball any day of the week. Fireball just does not do all that much for you. But then you also get things like Trace Purge, which removes all physical traces of the subject's presence or passage. It definitely can be handy. But then you have spells like Clean in the same level. Both are first level spells in Urban Arcana, which eliminates grime, dirt, and bacterial contaminants from a target and renders target scentless, which you can cast this in a room. This removes fingerprints, eyelashes, anything that could be removed by a good scrubbing, a good cleaning. All of that can be removed, and you can do it instantly, which is automatically better than Trace Purge. It's like, I'm not sure why they had Trace Purge in there. I think it's just so it's like you have some variations and options. And Trace Clean just does more than Trace Purge does, and really, you would probably want that over Trace Purge. And you also get things like True Strike, which adds +20 to your next attack roll, which that sounds great, but if you're a wizard or anything like that, you're not going to be doing the physical attacks unless things have really gone sideways. And your more combat-oriented characters, if they need that, things have also gone sideways, because your physical combat characters should be able to handle the physical combat with minimal buffs from you. If you're needing to cast True Strike on them just for them to be able to hit the target, you probably need to be running to begin with. And there's lots of other things. I couldn't find the spell again, but essentially you can derive healing from electricity, and they have this wonderful picture of a man dressed in SWAT gear jamming his fingers into an electrical socket and using that to heal him. Certainly feels flavor appropriate. It's got that feeling of meshing the magical, the mystical with the modern and technological. But the healing isn't great, and it's not that big of a spell. And even then, it's like, why don't you do other things instead? Why don't you do something else? You have many, many other better options. Other spells that are interesting and useful, don't get me wrong, some of these are absolutely great, like Clown Car, which creates an extra dimensional space within an enclosed vehicle that holds one more passenger per caster level. So if you're in the back of an SUV that seats 5 and you cast a spell on there, you're adding in, another five or so people in there. It's per caster level, not per spell level, per caster level. So you're going to be adding in a significant number of people that you can comfortably carry in a vehicle. That's huge. That's very useful. You also have things like Dimension Door and Slow. And you also get Wall of Force at 5th level, Cone of Cold, Hold Monster, Cloud Kill. And Cloud Kill being in there at level 5 is definitely interesting, but, there's lots of cool stuff in here. But again, the actual spell lists in and of themselves are not that overwhelmingly impressive. Other things do get added in later on, but those are in other books, and some of these books came out years between one another in some cases. It's wonderful that this is here, but I feel like they could have added in plenty more and done some really cool and interesting things. Like I said, it's a mixed bag, and certainly it's the same with a lot of the monsters and a lot of the magic items. The magic items, well, we can probably get into those another day, but suffice it to say, you have bullets or guns of healing. Now, the way the rest of my friends had read it at the time, and bear in mind, we were all in high school at the time, and not really the greatest at running coherent stories ourselves, but the way they read it was the gun would do lethal damage and do its healing damage simultaneously, so you had the potential to lose more health in addition to getting just a tiny bit of healing to offset it, but you still come out further injured rather than healed. I don't understand where they got that. We don't have a copy of Urban Arcana anymore. Everything I've been looking up has been online in this case, hence why the pictures are limited and I'm not waving the book around. But the way I'd always read it was, it just converts the lethal damage of the firearm to healing. So I don't know where they got that difference. I don't understand why there's that difference. It may have been a misprint in that particular book or a particular run of books. If that's the case, that's an example of something that needs to be worked on and probably should have been looked at and everybody just went, yeah, that's obviously wrong. That's stupid. But then again, it also makes for a great cursed item as well. And again, that's just where I think they could have leaned into things a little bit more. That's another thing. No cursed magic items. At least not in the Urban Arcana book. It's just incredibly unfortunate. I think they could have added in more. But they did have things like an actual magic 8-ball. It is absolutely fantastic. They also had magic fuel tablets. You drop it into the fuel tank of any vehicle and it will instantly fill it to full with a premium version of fuel of the appropriate type. And that's a great magic item, but it's also one that can be greatly abused if a DM gives you too many. And my DM gave me like 20 of them, so I started stealing tankers, emptying the fuel out of them and selling it, and then dropping a tablet in there and selling more premium high-end fuel to different stations. It was great. And it's another reason why the wealth bonus system wasn't used, but also I was still just making money hand over fist anyways. Like I said, the sky's the limit with your imagination on this one. You can blend and mix things in so many different ways. And definitely it's open enough for you to do so. But I do think that they missed the mark in some cases. They could have added in so many more. The field is so replete with ideas. You can do so much with this. They barely added in any fae to the setting, or at least not many that I can recall. Certainly we didn't have enough to make use of. They threw in vampires. They had different kinds of undead. You had illithids and dragons, but no beholders showing up. They did add in some unique creatures, some unique monsters, and that was fun and interesting, but they didn't add in enough. There's more they could have done, and the setting left me wanting more. Certainly I enjoy the opportunity to be creative and make these different things. Certainly it adds a certain uniqueness to each setting, and it can make each game different from DM to DM. But it's just one of those instances where I think I keep saying it, they should have done more. For me, if I had to rate this book in any way, I'd say it's a nice solid A, or call it a 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10. Somewhere in there, 9 out of 10. It's not perfect. It's great. It's incredible. It's so much fun. And I highly recommend, if you have opportunity to, pick this one up and add it to your D20 Modern book collection. It's incredible. The first opportunity I have, I'm certainly going to be doing the same. But I think that's where we're going to leave this for now. This has been my look at the Urban Arcana supplementary book for the D20 rule system. I've been your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. Thank you all so very much for your time, and you all have yourselves a good night.